Hello everybody. How you doing today? So I'm just gonna give you guys a quick update. These are my kids' pedal here. Um the springs for the car might not be here to June 17th. And because I'm working so hard and our kids' terrible public school is stopping soon, I wanted to use some resources. Oh my god, I'm so fat. I'm actually still sleeping for an hour or two before I go to work. Because I was up this morning. So, just anywhere I put it, I don't look good laying down. So, the springs are not going to arrive maybe to June 17th. And I definitely can't go into the desert till we get the right tires on the car. So I wanted to put the capital to use. And I like to get drones and stuff. If you read the comments, drones are not a priority. I can make video with my phone. I'll use my camera, and we're still gonna go out. That's not gonna limit my time. It will be a part of going out to get gold, and eventually we're gonna work it in. But we're not gonna do it at the expense of not going out there. Do you see? Look over here. On the bottom, right there, there's equipment waiting. There's equipment waiting to go find gold, and we're almost ready to go there. So what I did today is I had a premonition. Angels came. I'm just kidding. There's no way. I had a non-angelic premonition of what I need to do for my kids, and you guys don't know this, but way long ago, in a land far away, right after the internet was born, I was briefly in America with my German wife, and I was in Waco, Texas, and I rode my bike out to the Davidian compound where that terrible thing happened, what the American government locked up and burned 78 people, I believe, like 12 or a bunch of kids died, and I saw their tricycles, and it was a bad situation. I think I talked about that one of my one of my videos on the bikes, and when that happened, like 90% of those kids were like Australian heritage, like, so they didn't actually have family. You might not realize they didn't even have family in America to protest their deaths. They were like kid. You hear in the official media that they were like following a cult, and they're gonna drink the Kool-Aid and kill themselves. In reality, they were a lot of young kids, like underneath the age of 20, that were living together in a house, and many of them were from Australia, where their parents and families can't be heard. For an interesting link, check the YouTube out below. I'll put a link to the article called Injustice for All, which I was stopped at the Timothy McVeigh trial in Colorado before I was returning to Europe, in which I spoke about this terrible thing. But that's not what this is about. That's just a fun tidbit of information. But when I was in there, one of the first things I did is I put up a flyer to connect all the other students' computers to the internet before they had the internet. Like when the internet first started, and you had to use Trumpet, Windsock, and Windows. I don't know if you remember that way back in the day to connect to the internet. I I created I made flyers out, and I put the pre-beta Netscape version and used Trumpet Windsock to connect Windows 3, and I had all these real player beta and all these beta programs I would put on different students' computer, and I would show them what the internet was. This is way before AOL, and when they had Mosaic, and when they had Gopher. I don't know if you Gopher, right? And I would teach them, and I would just show up at their house. And they say, "Oh, it's the internet guy," and I had like that was my first business, and people would call me and they'd say, "Will you come?" And I'd show up, and they'd stop their house party or they stop their business, and I'd show them and I'd teach them like an hour to 3 hours, like what the internet was, what you can see, what you can do. And I have I'll put a link to some of my old experience that I put together on Flickr at the bottom of this. And anyways, why am I telling you this? What's this got to do with gold? So, and I taught. I mean, it was back in this time when the internet was crazy. Like, I was remember I was a major for computer network administration, but like it was like so new of a major, like for trying to get an associate's degree, what I never got. And I fought with my teacher who worked from Microsoft. He was a professor, and I was just a young kid, and I don't know what the fuck to do. And I was just briefly back from Eastern Germany for a little bit. I wanted to try to go to school, and I was fighting about whether or not you should use frames. And my idea, I was learning like HTML, like the very first versions of HTML, and I was underneath the idea you should use frames, and he was underneath the idea you should use tables. And we had a moral dilemma of arguments, and that was back when at 286 to 386, and the first Pentium was made. And I actually like would go, and I had worked in a computer repair shop, and I had odd jobs. Like I taught at the time the executive producer of the Jenny Jones show. Her parent were outside of Waco, and he was a prominent anesthesiologist, and he was from Ireland. I go to their house, and it was huge, like a castle, and he brought over this ancient Irish portraits, and they hung on the wall, and I loved going to his house. It was so freaking cool. And but I was there because she had a disabled brother, and I was teaching him how to create a website to collect his anime and just about computers in general and the internet. And he was special needs, and I was like one of my first teaching jobs, like 101, and I was happy to help him. It wasn't just about money, and but why am I telling you this crazy stuff? It's a magical story. So let's go with me on an autistic journey. So last night when I was driving, doing my rideshare job, being generally abused, like once I was teaching kids how to read, and now I'm sweeping up drunk people, saving lives in a different way where my life wastes away. I like to listen to podcasts sometimes. I was listening to podcasts on Our Strange History or something. I like these two guys, and they were teaching about the oldest brother, Joseph Bonaparte. This guy was the brother of Napoleon. You know, Napoleon actually gave a stone church to Guangzhou where I lived, and I went to this fantastic, they call it the stone church. Pretty cool. And I always thought, well, this is a present from Napoleon to China. Pretty cool history. But I didn't know Napoleon had like 8 siblings, and one of the siblings, this guy, Jonathan Bonaparte, he was older and he didn't really have political ambition. And Napoleon made him the king of Sicily or somewhere. And then he said, okay, I'll give that to my sister or something. I want you to be the king of Spain. This guy was even the king of Spain for a little bit, but he didn't really want to be the king. He was like a nice guy. He wanted to go to New York. And he went to New York in America, and they offered him the position to be the king of Mexico. And he turned it down. And to give you an idea of his political ambition. And he had more tomes, like tome is like a big book. He had more tomes. And I have also, I don't know if I told you guys, I have a huge library I made when I gave out laptops in China when I was working on my content management system, which you can learn a little bit about if you look at the Flickr portfolio on the bottom of this video that I'll put up there. I'm feeling awake. I might just go to work. But Napoleon's brother Joseph Bonaparte, he had the largest collection of libraries that was ever in more than America had. Like people would go to his house, like the guy from the Hamilton musical and all these cool, influential people, because he was actually at that time 1806 or something. He was like the richest American in the world, in America, which would be the richest American in the world too, ironically. But he was a nice guy. I mean, apparently he's a nice guy because his house caught on fire, and when his house caught on fire, like burnt to the ground, it was terrible. All the people helped him to get his stuff out, and he wrote a letter, and he like thanked them because they took all the gold and diamonds and stuff they could have ran away with, and all the people there, they brought it back to him. They gave it to him instead of running off with it. So apparently they liked this guy. And according to this podcast, he also ran into what was known as the Jersey Devil. Pretty crazy. You could read about that. Maybe that means he ran into an alien. Listen to that description. That's pretty cool. But why am I telling you about Napoleon's brother, Joseph, however you say his name, who happened to be a Count Joseph? Why am I telling you about this guy? Listen, we're going around in a circle. And gold. What's that got to do with gold? In my bed. So last night, that was pretty interesting, and I'd like to teach my kids about interesting things and make it part of my, they say, cross the curriculum. If you look in the bottom of, if you look at my, I don't know if you notice, I reorganized the site here. And at the bottom, I put a link to some of the early content management system video blog that I made. And at that time, I was studying at MIT's open courseware. I was studying all their blended learning. And I was a photographer. And before all my photography was stolen, I was getting into microstock photography, and I was learning Drupal as a way to create a content management server, so I could sell my photography to the world. At that time, Microstock was putting all freelance photographers out of work. It was the birth of microstock photography, which was a terrible thing, but it was also something that realized I had to learn a content management system. And what I did is I was learning about education. I was learning about blended learning, and I found Drupal. And wow, Drupal was like the first CMS I learned, and it was so powerful. Like I studied like just on my own, like HTML. Like you might not know this, but Janus Mutual Funds, they offered me a job for like a lot of money, 90 grand or something a year, when I was coming out of Waco back through Colorado to go back to Germany. And I went to their interview, and I pulled my computer out of my car, and I went up to their boardroom, and I set it up, and I connected it to their projectors, and it was like, for me, it was like Star Trek, their boardroom in Denver. And like they offered me the job to be their web developer, and I said no, I want to do it myself. And I ended up going back to this East German mountain village and was poor for many years. But I taught kids how to use the internet in there because the wall just came down. And like I saw the internet born in America, I saw technology come through the village. Like when the first I had the first ISDN line, and that was before the internet, and it was like dial up in the mountains in Germany. And I teach the kids, which went on to be very successful web developers in Germany, like Video Gold DE. My good friend Richard Ryan, which I guess was like my student, and and I made a network in the town hall's library. I shovel snow underneath my window in the park. We're in this village with 1,000 people called Broderode, and I became friends with the mayor. And for shoveling his snow, I lived in the top of this old house on top of the square where they had an attic, and it was cold in winter. And on the second floor, there was a guy named Herr Troutfeather, a really nice guy in his 90s. It was an old Nazi who had went to America to be in a workers' camp to make pickles in California. He was such a nice old man, and I really enjoyed meeting him. And for shoveling the snow, the landlord gave me their 1942 IFA motorcycle RT 125-2, and it's like this World War One looking motorcycle. Dude, it was cool. I carried it up to my attic, and that's another life, another story. But at that time, I was like, I made some consulting, and I made the website. I wasn't doing English teaching. I don't know. I don't know that you could. I don't know what teaching English was, but I made a website for ICOM, which is the oldest porcelain manufacturer in East Germany. And I would do things like learn JavaScript. I'd print out. I was working on the center of the net, and I'd print out my code, and I take all the spaces out of my code. And right when JavaScript was made, I try to compress different scripts, and I would compress my into JavaScript and make them into a jar, which is like a zip format for JavaScript, and compress. And I was trying to learn how to do it, like how to do all this stuff by myself. I guess I was self-studying computer science, and just trying to survive because there's like 22% unemployment when the wall came down. It was really hard to get a job, and my wife was a dental assistant. I was married to a German person for 6 years or something, and that's tragic. I think I told this story before. And I had become selbstständig. Ich habe ein Computerhandel gehabt, und ich war selbstständig. I got my own computer license, business license, and I tried to make an own computer business. And there's only like 1,100 people in the village, and there was high unemployment rate, and it's another story. And I could never really do what I wanted to do in my head because they didn't have the technology. But then later on, when I was learning about this content management system, like years later, like 10 years later in China, studying, like, again, looking at the open courseware from MIT, because like my first years in China, I had to buy dial-up cards and try to use the internet with dial-up network cards. Are so expensive in China. And then we had to use I had to use all these different windsock scramblers and all these different ways to get past the Chinese censorship. It was really a fun thing, a little bit. And like my autism enjoyed that kind of thing. And but but after the internet became faster in China, and I learned about open courseware, and I studied all the blended learning classes at MIT, and wow, you could go to all their lectures. So I went to all the MIT lectures like all the time, and it was so cool, you know. And then when I started building this content management system for my photography, and I found Drupal, I thought, oh my god, wow, this is so cool. I could do anything what I wanted to do when I was in East Germany trying and I was failing. I could do that now. And I was studying that, and then like about a year after I started making those videos you see in the some of my old work section in the bottom of my YouTube channel, like somebody stole all my photography. Somebody broke into my house in China. I can't really talk about these kind of videos when I live in China. Someone broke into my house when we were sleeping. I had a loft bed. They took all my backup hard drives and my laptop and my backup photography and my databases, and they left a couple $1,000s on the table in China. I mean, they didn't steal the money, they stole my data. And when I woke up and it was all gone, like I would spend days waking up at 5 in the morning and go out. I had a digital SLR and I had the gigabyte micro drive, which was like really expensive. Not This was back when they didn't have gigabyte. This is like the like not a flash drive, but micro drive. And I would do photography and I'd go out and do targets and I put my photos for Son Almy, and I had this huge database I made, um, offline database, and it was one of the most terrible things in my life. Like my database was stolen. I was gonna write a book one day, and I had all this superb photography, and it was stolen, and like I was destroyed. And at that point in time, I made the choice that I could never touch my camera again. It was such a painful loss for me. I had so much. My entire first 12 years in China were stolen from me. Like day after day, I would go out every single where and carry a camera, three lenses, a vest, 24 hours a day. I would wake up in the sunshine, go to bed at night. I had documented photography from, and my style was documented. I had no, you have no idea how painful it was. Um, so I could never touch a camera, but I continued to learn Drupal. Like instead of doing it for photography, I started the project that you see discussed in the Kickstarter, and I got to the point where I had thousands of students at two university, and I was doing what Khan Academy was doing. You could see some of my. I was working on the Kickstarting videos. I had a working product that I studied with small groups of people, with entire classrooms, and with universities. I was going to use it to teach teachers to teach, and give to under improv, impoverished people in the countryside. I just wasn't. I didn't really have a financial objective. I just wanted to do this to do it because like unlike America, where I come back here and they treat me like I'm a fucking idiot and like they're not giving me any job around teaching because they think I'm an idiot because I don't have one of their degrees. Um, the the universities and several universities I worked at allowed me to do what I wanted, and I did, and I had replaced entire curriculums, and I gave final exams, and I had implemented this on a huge scale, and it was in its final stages of testing. And I can't put this all online when I was in China, but um, my wife's mental health deteriorated, and I had to stop. I was working so hard on this I don't know. I told you guys like during the Arab Spring, I had a donated server that I had since I lived in Germany, and when I owned the center of the net.com, I stopped being able to pay the bills, but they kept giving me their server until I started using it. Like in what I was working on, it wasn't very scalable, so it was using a lot of resources. So they say, "Hey, we can't do this no more." I said, "But I'm doing this work for all these students." I didn't know what to do, and during the Arab Spring, I hung out on IRC chat, and I met the people from Al Jazeera in the IRC rooms, and they were using Nginx to manage their servers, and they were taught me about Nginx, and I looked into that, and I rented some managed server, and I had no idea about managing servers before, and I ran my own. I learned how to do Nginx, and I ran my Drupal Octopus Barracuda content management server, which I could create my own sites. And I managed my own server, and I learned how to do that at the same time I was developing. At the same time, I was have 900 university students creating their whole curriculum at two different universities, and I was creating the system which they're going to do their final exam on through a website through Drupal. They did their final exams, and it was so hard work that I literally it like in the classroom one day I lost 80 or 90% of my eyesight, and I went blind for like 5 minutes. I went to the bathroom. I thought, oh my god, I must be having some kind of aneurysm or something. I don't know. And was lucky my eyesight came back, but my wife's health was so bad. I had to give up this job to care for my wife, and when I gave that up for a year, um, the PHP and everything else became updated, and it was too large of a project to continue myself. I couldn't take my time away from my wife and my kids, unfortunately. So I switched from doing online, and I started getting cannibalizing laptops and learning Linux, and was trying to create my own Linux distros and my own content management system, and I tried to give out. First, I was giving out tablets, computers, and try to create customized tablets and basically do what the one laptop per child project was doing. You could see me talk about that in some of my old videos, and in fact, I'm not even trying to tell about that story. What am I telling you guys about right now? So, from Bonaparte to Germany to China, back here. So, in Waco, Texas, when I was connecting the students to the university network, one of the programs I put on there was VRML, virtual worlds chat programs. I don't know if you remember these. And I mean, this is back in the 14.4 modem days, right? Um, and I was teaching about virtual reality. Now, fast forward to this morning in the Springs. I've got, I, I still have the laptops that I created from workstations and gave out to the students, which you could learn about in the portfolio underneath the link, the Flickr link, in this video description. And I have that for my kids. Actually, I was building these Linux, and I was building these systems to support my wife and my kids in their homeschool, and I was giving the same thing, distributing it to small groups, research groups, and classrooms, and using it to teach in 1 to 50, 1 to 10, and in all different levels from pre-primary private education to in-class education to postgraduates. I test all these, and I gave each laptop 6 to 7,000 books, and I had a custom-made Calibri library using recall, complete search, and my children still have this in their own library here. But I've been watching uh, virtual reality develop and Oculus Quest and everything else. So today I bought three Quest 2s for my kids, and without the idea of gaming, I have no wish for my kids to be doing games yet. But there's a lot you can do with Oculus Quests. You could go on virtual tours anywhere in the world, connect with Google and go on Google Streets, connect to Wikipedia's. You could listen to podcasts in New York and find out about the Jersey Devil while you're actually in there virtual reality wise. You could go to other classes, you could do chemistry lessons, you could go to virtual labs, you could go with other people, and you could do all these things what you could do in the shitty virtual reality program back in the day, what I used to put on people's computers when it was Windows 3.1 and Windows 3. And I mean, my kid's laptop has DOS emulators where they're playing The Legend of Zork, right? And I would teach that to kids. I would use Zork in VirtualBox on laptops I would give to kids in China as a way to teach them English. That's called across the curriculum learning. That was blended learning from MIT. I love that. And I'm just an Uber driver now and stuff here, but whatever. So I did sign up for the beta tester program at Starlink from Tesla, and I paid for it. I haven't received a receiver. I've been selected to receive it. Hopefully, I do, because there's a lot of places where I go in the mountains and deserts that don't have the internet. And it would be, if I could get access to the internet and somehow get a remote job at the same time I'm looking for gold and doing stocks, that's cool. But I plan on using the Oculus Rift to give my children different assignments, like tell them where I want to go in the world. They could visit Pompeii, they could visit archaeological sites, they could visit labs, they could go on special assignments where I give them research reports and I want them to visit it. Or and I also want them to tell me how they're using it for educational purposes. And I love teaching. I do with my kids. I would teach all the students like I taught my own kids, like I taught the people in America, like I taught Jenny Jones, who's actually a brother's show, in a old Irish guy's house castle, and I would teach corporate businesses, like I was offered to teach at Janus Mutual Funds, and like how I always been. I don't know, you call it a teacher when you just, when I make these videos and I talk to you guys, is teaching. I mean, when I met my when I taught in China in the classroom, like instead of doing the boring textbook stuff about teaching the vocabulary of uh, classroom to students, you can see. I don't know if you can see the videos in the bottom, but I would take my kids and show them break through the Chinese firewall, and I would show them a virtual tour of the International Space Station and teach them vocabulary about the kitchen in the space station. And you know what? Before I did that, I'd say raise. And you know what? I love it because people are so predictable. When you teach the same class, and I would teach like sometimes 25 to 30 to 35 classes a week for 18 years, while other teachers would teach 12 classes a week. So when you teach a whole bunch of classes and you make the same jokes and you ask to raise a hand, you already know what everybody's going to say because you asked all the other classes in the morning by the time you get to the afternoon. So I'd say, raise your hand if you know that there's people living in space. And 95% of the students would not raise their hand. And I'd say it's true. and let me show you. And then I'd show them the ISS for the first time. And then I would take them on a virtual tour with the commander's videos, and I'd stop during the tour and I'd say, let's write in your notebooks and break you into groups on study. And this is the name for kitchen, and this is where they're sleeping. These are their bedrooms, and I'd show them. So I'd across the curriculum learning, and then, but before I did the lesson, I would say, raise your hand if you want to live in space, and and nobody would do that. But after my lesson, I say, raise your hand if you want to be an astronaut, and all of a sudden everybody raised their hand. Whereas, unlike the United States, everybody raise their hand maybe first, but when you don't know about that thing to even dream about it, you would never raise your hand about it. Right? So I'd make them raise their hand, and they did. I never taught them what to think. I just taught them how to think. And yeah, I love that. And different things, like I'd always ask them jokes like I'd say, how many people think that China, which is that bigger, Africa or China? And I even asked the students this in the car in America, and they fell. And actually, Africa is so big, you can put Europe, continental Europe, China, North America, India inside the continental outline of Africa. It's huge, big. And when you visualize that and you find these patterns, it's a great teaching opportunity. And like back, I was teaching in southern Guangxi at a Minyu Shuyan. It was the university for minorities. I was teaching the middle school students there. It was NASA's 50th you could look it up. NASA had their 50th birthday. So they had a lot of cool stuff online, and I was using that to teach English to make it interesting for my middle school students. At the same time, China was having a launch of the first man to go into space. Now, I had caught wind of that, but in China, nobody taught about it. It was hush hush at first. And in fact, at first when it happened, they won't tell you the day. And then when the launch was happening, they're going to tell you the day, but they won't tell you the time. And I wanted to try to watch it live, but it was impossible. They wouldn't even tell you who the astronaut was going to be to go into space the first time from China. Later on, of course, we know it's Yang Wei. But at the time, I was telling all the other Chinese teachers, which were my colleagues, I said, don't you know what's happening? China's getting ready to go into space. It's so big. We got to be using this opportunity as a teaching opportunity to teach our kids. Because I never thought Chinese kids, I thought my kids, our kids, like all the kids on the earth in general. And they're all like, oh, you're crazy. What are you talking about? You're so crazy all the time, Robert. And then a couple of weeks after that happened, like they all want to teach about Yang Wei and stuff, but they didn't want to teach when I was teaching about NASA's 50th anniversary and like what it was to go on the moon. And I always remember the famous quotation from Arthur C. Clarke, who said that the true value of the space program is not that any science, I'm butchering his quote, but was not the results of any scientific study from landing and stepping on the moon. It was not any of those rocks. The true value was an entire generation of youth that grew up glued to that screen as he stepped on the moon, who fell in love with the hard disciplines of science, that grew up to be engineers. That's the true value of the American space program, and I believe that. That's a great quote. And I use it to inspire like the youth. Like you could see a video on me talking about when Elon Musk landed the first rocket, when the Chinese workbook years later, was talking about a space hotel and all this science fiction. There's space hotel. So let me tell you, let's watch the first time a rocket land, and you could hear my students clapping in 2012 before I even knew I was going to work at Tesla. But but. So, anyways, I might be a little bit selfish, but I bought my kids an Oculus Rift per kid. So expensive, like $1,500 or something. And I I was, if you see the video when I cried when I left China, I wish I could give this to all the students in the world. I wish I could give out my laptops. I didn't have a monetary goal in China. I love doing my work. I would, after every class, I would sit with the parents. And I would teach the parents like an hour for free on how they could find different books in their library of the 6,000 books I gave them, and how they could use Cherry Tree and Linux, and how they could use that to help their kids study for the rest of their life. I would teach them, and I would teach them for every class, like for free. So that's why I had students who would call me up, and I never made advertisements. I would always be employed in China, and I would teach the Sun Yat-sen universities. The parents that were Rhodes scholars, I would teach their children, and I would teach in poor areas of countryside. I don't really talk about this really in China that much, but I'm always sad that I can't be doing this kind of thing in America. Maybe one day I can. I still in the center of the net and stuff. Off the bike in the bed. This is a deep thought cycle from the bed. But anyways, wait till you see what's happening from these Oculus Quest stuff. It's going to be very interesting, and I maybe one day I'll have the fate and I'll have the ability to just follow my passion. At least I do with my kids, and I help thousands of kids in China, and I had my students went to graduate, and then their kids became my students. And in the years that I taught in China, I learned so much. And you guys got to remember, like when I first started teaching, like when I was in hiding because I had an unpermitted birth, um, I couldn't say no to any job. I was the wetback teacher, and I was teaching 30 to 50 classes a week. Like I would teach like in 1 year I'd teach 4 years of a normal teacher, and I would teach from every kind of. I teach government offices to adult post education to I teach in public schools, private schools, from elementary to postgraduate. I'd have doctors come late when I taught in medical universities and say, "I'm sorry, I'm late. I just did a liver transplant." And I said, "Oh no, you did great. Wow, don't be sorry." And I loved my students in every single class. Like I loved my kids from the first time I didn't know anything about teaching really to my last class. Um, it was such a passion, in China, and also when you have large classes of 50 to 60 students, I would break down my classes into groups to use my online system, and I would grade every. I had thousands of students do video reports. I had them recreate. I would teach them about the Voyager space project and the golden record, and I'd have them say, "Look, if you're going to make a golden record of the Earth, what would you choose to be on it?" And let's make it. I would give them the first chance what they ever had to give a video presentation on the golden record, and like in Chinese traditional style at the time before the Beijing Olympics when they wanted to accelerate innovative teaching, I was teaching them to give presentations when you don't do that. And you know what? Nobody at any of these universities told me I had to do this stuff. I had complete free choice. I could teach. They said, follow the book a little bit And I took that to be like, oh, okay, I'm gonna give you assessments. I'm gonna create these predictive student management tables to predict based on your age group and where you're coming from. I wanted to predict how much I could see you improve before the end. So I'd create my own previous midterms, and I would create graphs, and I'd suck at databases. So I had these huge tables, and I would predict the improvement based on age, based on sex, and I would measure their improvement of each student for each class as a whole, and I would teach them from absolutely nothing. And when laptops became affordable, I'd show them how to buy secondhand laptops, and I'd show them how to use Linux, and I would give out computers, and I would go to secondhand computer warehouses and build them for like students, and I would let them do reports in groups, and I would, even before the computers and stuff, I would go and every student, there's not one student in that classroom in the back of the student, they couldn't put their heads down and go to sleep in my class. I would try to teach my kids at the Communist Party training school in Nanning before I went to Guangzhou to work. I would teach them, they had to go to the factory after work to pay for the school, but I would try to teach them things when I had jobs. One of my first jobs was teaching WTO English, and I was anti-WTO protester in America. So I would teach them how to not be a worker in a factory. And then I would be a Fortune 500 trainer. I taught the strategic developer of um, motor P&G. I taught the brand protection teams of P&G. I taught the vice president of AIA, AIG's IT. I was a corporate trainer. I taught HSBC. I taught at Nortel's R&D departments. I taught at, um, you can see my CV. I taught at Cove Abbott Vascular. I taught at Bristol Myers Squibb. I created my own. I created my own vocational training programs. They let me do. I would talk to companies, and like I'd be contacted through other training firms who've won contracts, and they'd call me up and they'd let me do all the curriculum development. So I remember one of the executives at one of our P&G. He said, "Robert, you're always." I'd have these little mobile printers for my laptop, and I would print out the lessons on the spot too for my materials. He said, "Robert, you always give us so many different materials. You should write your own book." And I thought, "Oh yeah." And so then I started putting all my favorite materials, and I had a challenge of how, when you have multiple different levels in the class, and you have to address every different level. I had to create these module based training worksheets, even and they were similar to Drupal. Later on, what I used, where you'd have to design one lesson that can be used for multiple different levels in the same group, and meet each level within one class, meet their challenge each person on their own level. So you challenge the beginner that could barely speak, and you challenge the intermediate person who speaks it. Like I'd have them interpreting quotations on a worksheet while the other person was just learning how to fill in the blank, who could barely say how are you, and I would have one lesson that could address both of them in one sheet, because you have a certain amount of sheets you can give to each person and have it be efficient. So one lesson, one paper I could use for 5 hours, because there's so much. There was compact. You should see my and then I would do like, I would spend like a week designing like 3 pages, and like I'd compact it, and I'd put the and designing the frames on the worksheet and the modules that could be, and I'd make these modules so they could assess different targets within the page, and it was super cool for my autism. And I used my own pages. I remember the first content management system that I found, this EMS system, and I'd map it to my curriculum, and I'd use like this group from 5 to 10 to 20 to 30 pages. It actually made thousands of dollars and supported my family, and got me jobs, like, and I was a foreign expert, like with a Z visa, not like a teacher with the government, when I was hiding from the government with a unpermitted birth, they found out about me and they sent me to their tax offices to teach the government officials. Like I taught the CDC to communicate with the WHO during SARS and FADEN and all this stuff when I couldn't really talk about freely about some really bad stuff that was going on when I was on the staff at the medical university. I was their vocational teacher to teach them to communicate with the WHO. And is that crazy? Lee Young, crazy English. Uh, I got I worked with him and I drank a little bit too much at the time. But anyways, as we approach an hour in this video, when I was going to go back to bed, and now instead I think I'm going to go eat ramen, listen to folk music from the Dust Bowl area, and observe random Americans and teach them fun facts while they're trapped in the car with me. But the Oculus Quest is here. One of the most things I feel guilty about in America is I feel like I have so much that I've learned from my students and the places I've been in the world and my colleagues, and like I had to learn. I was criticized. I was like in Hubei when I first got there, and it was cold as hell, and it wasn't cold like East. I lived in East Germany in the snow when the houses didn't have heat. That was cold, but then in Hubei it's really cold, like really less, more cold, and the pipes froze, and my first job in this abandoned wing of a school, and they'd come to my apartment. It was totally like a little bit of even a little bit culture shock from the smell of the village. I wasn't just fresh out of America, so otherwise it probably would have been way over the top culture shock for me. But it was still a little bit. So they said, "Well, here's a bucket of water. Hurry up and wash and go to class." And I said, "Cool, I'm very awesome challenge. All right." And then like when you received for me it was birth by fire. When you received criticism and you're alone and you're not on the foreign teachers go to expat bar kind of, I'm having a holiday in China. When you're in the country and you have an unpermitted birth and you're hiding a pregnant person because that was the laws at the time, and you have to do the job, and when your boss says students are not happy, you must do a better job, and or they're not interested, and it's all about they're not interested in your lesson. I had to find a way to interest them, but for me, I was challenged. When you're teaching 50 classes a week, you might be able to go and wing it for like 5 or 10 classes, and yeah, I got culture shock. I'm a white monkey. This is that. But when you're doing like high production, 30, 40, 50 classes a week, you can't, and you got to teach 40, 60, 80 hours, and they're paying money. You can't just bullshit through it all. And when you start doing the same lessons over and over and seeing patterns, you start to learn. So I had to learn and learn and learn and learn and learn and learn from my TAs. I learned their teaching methods from my colleagues. And I became what I needed to be in different situations. And I even later on, my good boss, who was a great mentor to me, she said, "Robert, I put you here." When I would fail, she would say, "How are you feeling? You're not another teacher. You know different methods. In this situation, use a different method." I say, "Yes, ma'am, you're absolutely right." And so I I'm here as a foreign expert, like really a valuable teacher. I was in China, and I'm nothing. It's very humbling, but now my kids will have an Oculus Quest, and the education can continue. And I've been still work on their EMS sometimes, and I'm using it and refining it. And my wife is a perfect specimen to learn from the countryside. When she can use it, it can be replicable for other people to use with their kids, and I do that. But wow, that's so crazy. I'm sorry that I go off on my crazy autistic tangents, but anyways, we're gonna be go look for gold. I'm gonna get out of bed and I gotta make up all that money that I just spent, and I got till the 16th to get it, and I'm going big or going home. It's about all this niche. I talk about everything and nothing, right? Um, but I'm sorry I'm so fat, man. I gotta go work really hard. The British are coming, but no, I'm just kidding. He didn't say that, right? He didn't. He wouldn't say that. That he would row through the village quietly in secret. Um, but but stay tuned. There's gold in them there hills. Check out the bottom for some links to that story about Westward. Maybe I'll put that there, and other things. And look at the new layout. I cleaned up the playlist. See you guys later. Bye.